The Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes. The crowds gathered in vast numbers, their voices a gentle murmur that rose and fell like the wind over the hills. Men, women, and children had come from every corner of the region, their hearts hungry for wisdom, their souls yearning for guidance. They had heard of Jesus, of the miracles he performed and the truth he spoke, and now they followed him wherever he went, seeking more than what the world could offer. Seeing the multitudes, Jesus ascended a nearby mountain. The climb was not steep, but it lifted him above the throng, giving him a vantage point from which to address them all. As he reached a place where the ground leveled, he sat down, a gesture that marked him as a teacher ready to instruct. His disciples, ever close to him, gathered at his side, their anticipation mirrored in the eyes of those who looked up from below. Jesus opened his mouth, and the world seemed to hush in reverence. His words flowed, simple yet profound, carrying the cadence of eternal truth. The crowd leaned in, their hearts hanging on every syllable. "Blessed are the poor in spirit," he began, his voice steady and clear, "for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." He spoke to those who felt the weight of their own spiritual emptiness, offering them the hope of God's infinite grace. The faces in the crowd reflected a mix of surprise and relief. Such words were unlike anything they had heard from the religious leaders of the day. "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted," he continued, his tone imbued with compassion. Many in the crowd, burdened by loss and hardship, felt tears prick their eyes. His words were a balm to their wounded hearts, a promise that their pain would not be in vain. "Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth." His gaze fell on those who lived humbly and quietly, unnoticed by the powerful, yet cherished in the eyes of God. "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied." The passion in his voice stirred the hearts of those who yearned for justice, for goodness, for a world aligned with God's will. "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy," he said, a gentle smile playing on his lips. His words resonated with those who had forgiven even when it was hardest, who had shown kindness in the face of cruelty. "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." The promise struck deeply, touching those who sought to live with integrity, unclouded by deceit or malice. "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God." A murmur rippled through the crowd as they considered the challenge and beauty of bringing harmony where there was conflict. "Blessed are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." The faces of the crowd grew solemn, as some among them had suffered for standing firm in their faith. His words affirmed their sacrifices, elevating their struggles to a divine purpose. Then his gaze shifted to his disciples, and his voice softened yet grew more personal. "Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." His words were a mix of comfort and challenge, urging his followers to endure with courage, for their trials tied them to a legacy of faith that spanned generations. The crowd listened, their hearts stirred, their spirits lifted. His words were unlike those of any teacher or leader they had ever known. They carried a light that pierced through their doubts and fears, leaving behind the seeds of hope. The mountaintop had become a sanctuary, and the teachings of Jesus would echo in their hearts long after the moment passed. Through his words, the kingdom of heaven felt closer than ever, and the people knew they had witnessed something divine. Disciples and the world. The sun cast its warm glow over the mountainside as Jesus sat among his disciples, his words carving paths of understanding into the hearts of those who listened. The crowd gathered around him, their faces alight with curiosity and yearning, each person leaning forward to catch every word spoken by this teacher who spoke with such authority and grace. "You are the salt of the earth," Jesus began, his voice firm but inviting. The metaphor stirred their imaginations. Salt, so essential and valuable, was used not only to enhance flavor, but to preserve what would otherwise decay. But if the salt loses its taste, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything, except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. The words hung in the air, a call for them to live lives full of purpose, bringing renewal and preserving goodness wherever they went. Jesus was telling them that their faith and actions must not grow stagnant or lose their vitality. Pausing, he continued, his tone softening yet deepening in significance. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. His gaze traveled over the crowd, his words planting a sense of responsibility and hope. The image was vivid, a city gleaming on a hilltop, its light visible to all, a beacon of guidance in the dark. Nor does anyone light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. The crowd nodded as understanding dawned on their faces. Let your light shine before men, Jesus urged, in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. The people murmured softly, the weight of their newfound purpose settling over them. Jesus wasn't asking them to hide their faith, but to live it boldly, to let their actions reflect the divine light within them. As the murmurs quieted, Jesus leaned forward, his eyes earnest. Do not think that I came to abolish the law or the prophets. I did not come to abolish but to fulfill. The crowd held their breath, digesting the magnitude of this statement. Jesus was not dismissing their traditions, but rather breathing new life into them. For truly I say to you, he went on, his voice steady with conviction, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or stroke shall pass from the law until all is accomplished. His words resonated, bridging the promises of old with the reality of his presence. The people could feel the threads of prophecy weaving through the moment, binding their history and their future together. Whoever annuls one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same, Jesus warned, shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven, but whoever keeps and teaches them shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. His voice, though gentle, carried an unyielding truth. Faith was not about outward appearances or hollow gestures, but about obedience and sincerity. Finally, his gaze swept over the gathered crowd, his eyes filled with compassion and urgency. For I say to you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. The words landed with a jolt. The scribes and Pharisees were known for their strict adherence to the law, their outward piety. Yet Jesus' call was for something greater, righteousness born not of ritual, but of a transformed heart. The crowd sat in awe, the meaning of his teachings turning over in their minds. This was no ordinary teacher. This was someone who called them to be more, to shine, to preserve, to reflect the very character of God. And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting its golden light over the hillside, those who listened felt the stirrings of something extraordinary. They had been called to be salt and light, to live lives that illuminated the path to the kingdom of heaven. Personal relationships. The crowd sat in quiet anticipation as Jesus continued to speak, his voice carrying a depth that reached straight into the hearts of those gathered. His teaching challenged not only their actions, but the very thoughts and intentions that shaped their lives. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden light over the mountainside, as he began to unveil a higher calling, one that pierced through the surface of the law and went to its core. You have heard that it was said to the ancients, you shall not commit murder, and whoever commits murder shall be liable to the court. He began, his tone measured but firm. The crowd nodded. This was familiar territory, a commandment etched into their culture and faith. But then he added, But I say to you, everyone who is angry with his brother shall be guilty before the court. A ripple of surprise passed through the crowd. Anger? How could that bear the same weight as murder? He pressed on, his words deliberate. And whoever says to his brother, "You good for nothing," shall be guilty before the Supreme Court. And whoever says, "You fool," shall be guilty enough to go into the fiery hell. The weight of his message settled over them like a heavy cloak. It wasn't just about outward actions, but the condition of the heart, the hidden thoughts that could corrode relationships and lives. His voice softened, yet his words carried urgency. Therefore, if you are presenting your offering at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your offering there. First, be reconciled to your brother, and then come and present your offering. The crowd listened intently, picturing the humility it would take to pause worship to mend a fractured relationship. He turned to the theme of reconciliation. Make friends quickly with your opponent at law while you are with him on the way, he urged, so that your opponent may not hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the officer, and you be thrown into prison. Truly, I say to you, you will not come out until you have paid the last cent. The lesson was clear. Resolve conflict swiftly and with humility, for harboring it only led to greater suffering. The weight of his teaching deepened as he addressed another commandment. You have heard that it was said, "You shall not commit adultery," he began, the crowd once again affirming their understanding. But I say to you, everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. The crowd was stunned. Lustful thoughts held the same gravity as the act itself? He pressed further, speaking of the radical measures one must take to avoid sin. If your right eye makes you stumble, tear it out and throw it away. It is better to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. His words, though stark, painted the seriousness of guarding one's heart and integrity. He touched on divorce, vows, and the essence of truth, calling them to a higher standard of commitment and honesty. Let your statement be yes, yes, or no, no, he said. Anything beyond this is of evil. His words called for a simplicity and purity in communication that reflected God's character. And then, with a steady gaze, he addressed justice. You have heard that it was said, "An eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth," he began, referencing the long-standing principle of proportional justice. But I say to you, do not resist an evil person. Whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. The crowd sat stunned as he called them to respond to injustice, not with retaliation, but with mercy. He spoke of generosity and going the extra mile, painting a vision of a love that transcended the limits of human fairness. Finally, his words grew both tender and challenging. You have heard that it was said, "Love your neighbor and hate your enemy." But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. For he causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. His call was radical, a love that mirrored God's own, unconditional, unrelenting, and all-encompassing. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? He asked. Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what are you doing more than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? His question lingered, drawing each listener to examine their own heart. And then, his final call rose above the quiet murmur of the crowd. Therefore, you are to be perfect, as your heavenly Father is perfect. His words were not a demand for flawlessness, but a call to a life of growth, of becoming more and more like the God who created them. The crowd sat in awe, the depth of his teaching leaving an indelible mark on their souls. His words were not easy to hear, but they were filled with truth and purpose. On that mountainside, the people were invited to a new way of living, one that turned the world's values upside down and called them to embody the kingdom of heaven on earth. The challenge was great, but so too was the grace that flowed from the one who spoke.